Welcome back to the TPR 86cc build series. As you'll see beside me, there's nothing in the CVT case. I've taken my entire CVT apart and I've been cleaning and inspecting everything. Everything looks pretty good in there aside from the clutch and the clutch bell. I've shown in a previous video that there's a crack in the clutch bell, and it looks like now there may be more cracks beginning to form in other areas. Just in the bottoms here of that section. My modified stock clutch appears to be doing pretty well until you look at the back plate. You can see here the back plate is pretty close to the clutch shoes. But then if I rotate this around, all of a sudden I've got a large gap in most of the other areas. And what that means is the back plate is warped. So the back plate can be replaced, but I'm not going to do that right now. I think it's finally time to try out the Stage6 Torque Control clutch and the Stage6 RT CNC clutch bell. I got this stuff a little while ago. I meant to do this swap earlier, but then I tried out a couple of belts, got into experimenting with those, and then the engine lost compression and I had to fix that, so it's all been put off for a while. I bought the clutch, the bell, and these two sets of springs from scootertuning.ca. Now they're in Canada and I'm in America, but they're still my favorite place to buy scooter parts because they can get everything to me very fast. They also carry all the top brands of racing parts. They carry sports stuff, stock stuff, whatever you need for your scooter, they've probably got it. They're very helpful. If you ever contact them, they'll get back to you quickly, and everything can get to your door very quickly, even from Canada, with reasonable shipping rates or even free shipping on orders over, I think it's $200. So make sure you check those guys out. Before I try to set up or install anything, I want to give you a look at what you get if you buy these parts. So to begin with, this is the Stage6 Torque Control clutch. Here's the part number on the back. This is the 107mm clutch. You've got the clutch in here. It's currently got white springs installed, which are the soft springs. Then you get a little tuning and accessory packet in there. The kit includes another set of clutch springs, and these are their orange medium strength springs. Now from what I've seen, Stage6 only sells 3 sets of clutch springs for this. The soft, which are in the clutch already, the white ones, the medium here, the orange, and then they have a hard set, which are red. And the hard or the firm springs are the ones that, to my understanding, most people use with a racing-oriented kit. So it would have been kind of nice, since they already included 2, if they just went ahead and put all 3 sets in there and you had a total kit ready to go. But still, at least you get a couple of sets of springs to play around with. You also get some brass weights. These can be installed into the shoes to add weight. And then they give you a couple of Allen keys here to help you adjust and work on the clutch. You get a contra spring adapter plate or a spring seat. You don't need this for all applications, to be honest with you. I forget which application that you're supposed to use this for, because I believe now that they basically make one clutch kit and they sell that for multiple scooters. And then you get a little warning here about adjusting the preload. Moving on, this is the Stage6 RT CNC clutch bell. Here's the exact part or model number on the back. And they do have different versions of these. So this is the 433. For the Minarelli, you can have a 433 or a 450, and that is actually the weight. My scale says 435 grams. When it's rated 433, it's probably that my scale is wrong. If you got the 450 version, that would mean that you'd get a 450 gram bell. And I think these go up to as much as 480 grams for different applications. Changing the mass of the clutch bell would affect its momentum and inertia. So the heavier bell would be more resistant to change, meaning if the bell is still, when your clutch engages and you go to try and start spinning that bell, it will resist that a little more. And also on the opposite end, when the bell is in motion, so it's moving at a high rate of speed, and you want to slow it down, it would also resist slowing down a little more. I kind of think that probably is one of those things that most of us won't need to worry about too much. 17 grams of difference in the clutch bell for the average tuner. I'm not even sure if you'll notice it or not. As it says right on there, it's CNC cut. Appears to be cut from a single piece of material, so you won't have to worry about anything coming apart. You can see on the outside here, they have these kind of ribs cut in there that provides a little more surface area and can help to cool the bell a little better. On the front, you've got these large windows and those allow you to access the springs without ever having to remove the clutch bell. You'll also see on the side that you have little access holes, and those can line up so that you can access these set screws, and again, you don't even have to remove the bell in order to tune the clutch. Nothing too fancy going on the inside, just a nice, flat, smooth surface for the clutch pads to seat against. When I bought the clutch, I picked up a set of white soft springs and a set of orange medium springs. And I actually wanted to buy a set of red firm springs. Those are the ones that I really thought I would need, but unfortunately they were out of stock there, and I'm sure a lot of you have seen Stage 6 stuff. These Stage 6 clutches have been very hard to get for a long time anywhere. And since the pandemic, it seems like all tuning supplies and pretty much everything in general is a little harder to get. So unfortunately, I couldn't get those. But I should have asked the guys at scootertuning.ca exactly what the clutch came with, because it turns out, as I just shown you, the clutch does include both of these sets of springs. So those are really nothing more than spares to me. I wanted something firm. I looked around. The only place I could buy firm springs for this possibly would be overseas, and I really didn't want to get into that. So I found on GeForceMX.com that they sell what they call extra firm springs. So I ordered those. They turned out to be made by Maximum RPM, and they say 2,500 RPM on the springs. So I'm not exactly sure what they are, but obviously by the name extra firm, I would assume that they are a little stiffer than Stage 6's firm springs. I want to do a bit of setup before I even install the clutch, because I think it's going to save me time in the long run. So to begin with, I don't want these white springs in here because my understanding is that those are generally best for stock and maybe very mild tuned setups. The orange springs would normally be for something like a sport setup or maybe a little beyond there. And most people with anything higher revving seem to use the red, the firm springs from Stage 6, which again I couldn't get. But I do have these purple extra firm springs by Maximum RPM, so I'm going to install those. And I'm also going to install these brass weights. Each shoe has 3 recesses, and each recess will hold one of these brass weights. Each one of these weighs approximately 2.5 grams, and there are 9 of them. That would come out to 22.5 grams if you filled every spot on each shoe. The entire clutch with no weights installed is about 560 grams. So if I added all 9 of those weights, it would come out to about 582.5 grams. For comparison, the clutch that I've been using is a 112 millimeter stock Minarelli clutch that I have drilled out and lightened, and that comes in at 675 grams. So even if I add every brass weight to this Stage 6 clutch, it will still be nearly 100 grams shy of what the clutch that I've been using was. I haven't worked with a lot of clutches, but what I have noticed is that I tend to get a better result with a heavy clutch. I think that's because I'm about 300 pounds, and I really like launches or hard takeoffs, and I like that if I hit the gas at a low speed, it will grab hard and it will pick the front wheel up, or it will take off. I don't like a lot of slip in the clutch there. So I think that extra mass in the clutch really helps it to grab onto the clutch bell and get it moving. So I'm going to go ahead and install all 9 of these brass weights to begin with, and I'm also going to install the purple springs, as I said earlier. I think that will probably be my closest bet on a starting point for me. I could be totally wrong, but that's my best guess right now. So now let me show you how to go ahead and do those changes to the clutch. Changing the springs and swapping brass weights can both be done at the same time because you have to remove the spring in order to access the weights. So to begin with, if you have a known working setup, something that you like, you may want to note the position or the markings on this little adjuster that each clutch spring is attached to. So you can see there's sort of graduations there. There are little lines in there. So note exactly where that is set. If you like your current clutch settings, write that down somewhere. Now if we go over and look at the side of the clutch, we'll see that there is a screw, and that moves this adjuster, that little black piece that you can see in there that one end of the spring sits in. So if you turn that in, it will pull the adjuster away from the spring, or it will put tension on the spring. and if you turn it out, it will actually move inward and take tension off of the spring, and that's what you want to do to remove the spring. So use the supplied Allen key and loosen that. Turn it to the left or counterclockwise, and then you'll see that that's relieving tension on the spring and the shoe there. Then push the shoe in just to relieve a little more tension, and all you should need is a pair of needle nose pliers or even a small screwdriver or pick, so you can grab that spring and pull it out of there. So you've already seen one advantage of this Stage 6 clutch. I'm sure a lot of you have changed clutch springs, and it takes a lot of effort. You got to pull on the things or find something to kind of pry them in there, and you can see because of these adjusters, that spring was just very easily removed. The adjuster can fall out, so be careful not to lose that when you work on this. You can see if you tip this to the side, it will slide right out of there. You've got the adjuster body and then the screw itself. If you screw the screw out too far, then that could also come out and you could lose it. So just be careful with those two things. If they do fall out, no big deal. You can see, just screw that back in a little bit. Then you'll see the hole in the side of the clutch. And that could also come out, I suppose, but it appears to be pressed in there, so I don't think it's going to go anywhere unless something's wrong with your clutch. And you just drop that adjuster in, make sure the marks are facing outward. So the mark should be facing this side of the clutch. Drop that in there, and you're all set. Once the spring's out, you can easily push the shoe out and access the 3 spots for the weights. I'm going to go ahead and install all 3. You can see they just basically drop in there. What I want to say though is make sure you give the same treatment to every shoe. So if you put 3 weights in this shoe, put 3 weights in every shoe. If you put 1 weight in this shoe, put 1 weight in every shoe, and also put 1 weight in the same position. So if you put a weight in the center of this shoe, put a weight in the center of every shoe. Or if you put a weight here and here on this shoe, put a weight here and here on every shoe. They must be treated equally. That way you're not out of balance. Once you get those in, then you can just push this in behind the clutch again. Now it's time to install the new spring. Again, this is the extra firm spring that I have. Hopefully it goes in just as easy as the soft spring came out. I'm going to try to drop that in. I'm actually going to start by dropping it in on the adjuster side. That way it holds a little bit of tension there. I'm going to take my needle nose pliers and try to pull that over. And then get that to seat inside of this one. And even with that extra firm spring, you can see that that went in pretty easily. Now the spring's in there, but there's really no tension on it. So we've got to go back to our adjuster on the side and the Allen key and turn that in, turn that clockwise, which will actually pull the adjuster kind of outward and put tension on the spring. If you have a known working setting, then go ahead and pay attention to the adjustment marks on there and set it back to where you had it. Otherwise, what I'm going to do is just begin to put good tension on this clutch pad. So I don't want to feel the shoe moving in or out. Now I just need to do the same thing for the remaining 2 springs and shoes. Before you can call a spring swap complete, you need to take a really close look at all of those markings on the adjuster. And every single spring needs to be set the same way. So for me, you can see that these things have long lines and short lines. So I look at mine and I see that there are 4 tall lines or long lines exposed, and then 1 short line, and that short line is right up against the adjuster. And then I go and look at each spring and try to make sure it's in exactly the same spot. So with a close look at this one, it actually looks like it sits just a tiny bit out. So I can go and adjust that a little bit further in until that last half mark is kind of touching the edge of my adjuster. Then I can move around to the last one, take another good close look at it. So do your best to get all of those exactly the same. Since you can swap the springs and do spring adjustments without ever having to remove the bell or the clutch from the scooter, I'll just show you that real quick. I'm just going to put this clutch onto the rear pulley without a contra spring so it's quick. And then put the clutch bell in place. We already know that you need to be able to access this adjustment screw in order to either adjust the spring tension or change the springs out. And I've also shown you that there is a hole in the side of the clutch bell. So you'll just align the hole in the bell with that set screw. That allows you to put your Allen key in through the hole, and then you can change the adjustment or remove and install the springs just like I showed you. And the window in the bell will allow you to easily see the adjustment that you're making. Now I'm ready to install the contra spring and put the clutch on there, right? No, not exactly. You should always do a test without a contra spring before you set up your clutch. So set the clutch on top of the rear pulley, make sure it's seated all the way down, and then twist the rear pulley and open it all the way up. What you're looking for is whether or not you see the clutch move when the rear pulley tries to open all the way. So right now, the clutch isn't moving when I open the pulley all the way, and that means there's no interference between the rear pulley and the clutch. In this case, I have a spacer on my rear pulley because I had that issue with the stock clutch. When I move this all the way up, it would hit the stock clutch, and that limits my belt travel. Now I can try this without that spacer and see what happens. It's not moving the clutch because if I remove that spacer, when I try to push this all the way down, it is very tight against those threads. But I can see that the pulley is actually contacting the clutch, so I do need that spacer. And again, that's something that you always want to check. Now I'm actually ready to install this. I've got one more check before I try to install this on the scooter, and that is the spacing between the clutch and the clutch bell. So Malossi supplies this spacer with their overrange kit. You would normally put this right here on the bearing in the rear pulley, and that spaces out the bell a little higher off of the clutch, because typically with other clutches there is a clearance issue. The clutch bell doesn't sit out far enough and it will actually rub on the clutch. Now I can see that without this, or with the spacer, that's not an issue for me, but I'm also going to check without the spacer. If I don't need it, no sense in using it. And without the spacer, it doesn't appear to be an issue either. It may change when I tighten everything down, that's a possibility, but for right now I'm going to try to install this without that spacer in place. You also want to take a look at the threads protruding from the end of the clutch bell here. Make sure there's enough that you get a good engagement with your clutch nut. If you don't have enough threads sticking out of there, it could be that you've got too much spacing somewhere, either trying to space the bell out from the clutch or spacing the clutch out from the rear pulley, and you may have to go back through it and find a better solution. After this is installed and tightened, give the pulley a good spin. Listen for any kind of contact, see if it hangs up. It should move freely. If not, you're going to have to go in there and find out why. I'm going to try to fire this up with an electric drill. That way I don't have to install the CVT cover and I can get a good look at the clutch. I'm hoping that maybe I can shorten my tuning time just by verifying that this is at least somewhere in the ballpark of where I'd expect it to engage for good results. as far as I can tell while trying to hold the brake, work the throttle, and look at the CVT, it appears to be engaging somewhere around 7,000 RPM or maybe a little bit higher. I can see that my belt is moving a little bit before it engages. It looks pretty similar to what I had going on with a modified stock clutch that worked very well for me, so I'm going to go ahead and start here. Definitely passing the wheelie test. Way better than the DrPulley DrPulley. See if I can keep it on the ground enough to do a straight run. Feels pretty good so far. Feels similar to the stock clutch, but I've actually really liked my stock clutch the whole time. So that's not necessarily a bad thing. It seems like it actually wheelies easier than it did before, so it's got to be grabbing pretty hard. I am going to go down to another little test strip here, we'll call it, where it's kind of surrounded by trees because it is a little windy, and I just want to make sure if I'm timing anything that it's a little more accurate. That went much better than I expected for the first try. It felt very good on all the acceleration runs, and I liked how snappy it was. I came back, took all the video footage inside, and analyzed that, and I see that once averaged out, my 0 to 30 time is 3.3 seconds, 0 to 40 is 5.1, and 0 to 50 is 8.0. That's very good based on everything that I've done in the past. Just for a couple of examples, the quickest average times that I've ever recorded with this thing, the best were with the electric water pump when I had that on there, but that's not robbing any horsepower. And it did 3.5, 5.2, and 7.9. So it was worse aside from the 50 mile per hour time, which the electric water pump, it should have the advantage of making a little bit more horsepower. The best time that I have with a mechanical pump on this thing was 3.5, 5.2, and 8.1. So it beats all of my previous 0 to 30 and 0 to 40 times, and is at least very close to even the 0 to 50 with an electric water pump. So the main concern for me is 0 to 30 when tuning the clutch, because that's where the clutch is really doing its job. And I think after that, most of the gains that you see are just because if you can get to 30 quickly, then you can get to 40 more quickly most of the time if all else is equal. So it does very well 0 to 30. I think I'm going to go ahead and adjust this a little bit further and see if I can get any more out of it or if it goes the wrong way. As I pointed out earlier, you've got long and short graduations on here. On my first test run, I had 4 of the long and then 1 short showing, so what I would call 4.5 for the setting. On this one, I've tightened it up more, so I'm basically at a 4 setting. I can see 4 of the long graduations, but I can't see that half or short graduation on the right of it anymore. And I've done all 3 springs the same way. just from watching it on the stand, it didn't seem like a huge difference. It seemed more like a fine-tuning kind of difference there. So I'm going to go ahead and move this a little more. I went from 4.5 to 4, so I'm just going to take it down to 3.5, and whatever it is there, I'm going to try it out on the road. And one thing I've noticed, there are a couple different ways that that hole can align with the set screw back there, and one of the ways you can see the spring in the setting a lot better, so make sure you try rotating it around if you can't see the spring setting the first time. That setting felt pretty good to me. Then I came home and checked the numbers, and now I don't like it so much. As you can see, it is now 0.3 of a second slower to 30, and then it's slower to the other speeds as well, but really takes a loss 0 to 30, and that's my favorite thing, so that setting's got to go. I would back the clutch springs off more than I had them before, but they're at the least tense setup that I can kind of do. I'm at the end of the markings on there. So my only option would be to go to medium strength springs and hope that if I put a lot of tension on the medium strength springs that perhaps they will rev up high enough that it works well for me. I'm at least going to give that a shot. I'm pretty happy with how I set this thing up the very first time. I wouldn't be disappointed to just leave it there. But out of curiosity, I've got to see what happens with the medium strength springs. I've got all 3 medium orange springs installed, and they are all set on the 3rd long hash mark, or the 3rd tall graduation on there. So let's see what that does. As far as I can tell, it's engaging around 7,000 RPM, maybe a bit shy of that. So I think this will be a good test because it's a little more mild than the original setup that I tried in here. And that might be just what it needs, could be too mild, but we'll find out. This morning's test runs felt great to me. I mean, really, really good. When I took off, I had to back out of the throttle a few times because it was trying to pick the front wheel up, and so I had to do more test runs than normal because obviously when I back out of the throttle, I'm slowing down, and I wanted accurate numbers. I had to set all the way as far as I could get on the front of the seat and lean over as far as I could just to keep the front end down consistently. So I thought my fastest run or quickest run that I recall is 3.1 seconds, 0 to 30. That's non-averaged, and I really thought I might see a 2.9 or something like that when I came home. Turns out the importance of real data shows once again, because when I actually looked at the numbers, I've lost 0.1 seconds, 0 to 30, same thing 0 to 40, and then it equaled my best results 0 to 50. So I think what happened is it was about 55 to 60 degrees this morning. Yesterday it was probably 70 to 75 degrees when I was testing. And this carburetor setup is usually tuned rich by me. So it tends to like it when the weather gets cool. It runs very hard when it cools down a little bit. And I do that on purpose because I'd rather lose a little horsepower in the warmer weather and then not melt a piston if it cools down. So I think basically a little added horsepower made up for the springs not working quite as well. At this point, I could tighten up the setting on the orange springs and keep trying, but I was very happy with the initial setup with the purple springs, so I think I'm just going to go back to that. Realistically, I could play around with this thing for a very long time, and maybe I could get it down to an extra tenth off, and maybe I couldn't. I'm just not that interested in putting a ton of time into it right now to try and go into that level of detail with the clutch spring settings. I'm very happy with the way it runs. I'm happy to finally have found an aftermarket clutch that works for me. Unfortunately, I'm not a shop owner, I'm not a professional racer, and I don't have anyone sending me parts for free to just test everything, so I haven't used a lot of clutches over the years. I have done a lot of work with stock clutches. That's been my primary clutch all the years that I've been in scooters. But basically this is what I've had aside from the DrPulley or DrPulley HiT clutch, which I don't have here anymore because I got rid of that thing as quickly as I could. But stock modified clutch, I think, is kind of the winner if you're on a budget. You can go pretty far with a modified stock clutch. As I've shown you in multiple videos, it's been very consistent for me, and it doesn't take a whole lot of effort. Basically, for the cost of a set of springs and some time drilling and weighing things out, you can make a real difference and get a pretty good launch. I've done plenty of little power wheelies with these things. They work well for what they are. Then I moved on. Actually, shortly after I got my first scooter, I bought a clutch just like this. This is the second one because the first one broke. But these are made by multiple brands, I believe. My first one was MRP, and I think this is a Motoforce. But it's essentially exactly the same clutch. I wouldn't be so sure they didn't come from the same factory. But these work all right, but I never liked them as much as even a modified stock clutch. So to me, they were kind of a waste of money, and that's why I really haven't messed with them very much. Then I moved on and I tried the DrPulley HiT clutch. That thing seemed like it was designed by a team of engineers that sat around and really thought about how a clutch works, and then they came up with the idea of pillow springs and thought they were going to change the world as far as clutches are concerned. And you get tons of springs with that, and it seems like you got everything you need to get it in tune. And then, at least for me, it turned out that I never could get it right. And I think if you go back and look at my videos about that, you'll see that I put a lot of time and effort into making sure I gave that clutch a fair chance. And it just couldn't even match my modified stock clutch, which is really disappointing for something that expensive that is in the league with any of the high-end clutches as far as price. Then the Stage6 clutch, I finally got a chance to try this thing out, and I've been very happy with this. This is the first clutch, honestly, that I have put on this scooter, or any scooter that I've owned, and been truly happy with it, had no regrets about spending money on it. It seems to me that this thing was designed by people that actually race scooters or tune scooters. It wasn't just a team of engineers sitting around in a room, would be my guess. They had real scooter riders and tuners with input on this clutch because it works so well, but it also is simple. There's nothing overly complex. You don't have to try and figure out any new sets of springs or any complicated ideas. You've got simple adjusters, you've got windows, so you can get the clutch springs in and out quickly. The adjusters allow one set of springs to do a lot of functions. So I think you could probably work with these orange springs. I would have to guess could work on a sport kit. And then you've seen me using them on this hyper race, low-end hyper race, but still 14,000 RPM setup. They're working for me, and I've got more tension that I can put into there. So I think they give you a really wide range without having to have a ton of springs. And it just overall seems like a smart design. I like that you can change the weights in here, so you can change a lot of properties and really tune the thing. But on the other hand, you can get it in tune pretty quickly, and it's easy to work with. So between the bell and the clutch, really happy. Finally, I've found an aftermarket clutch that I think the next time they are available, because I don't know if it's COVID or what, but things are just hard to get right now, I'm going to try and pick up another one of these as a spare because I really like it. Instead of having a spare stock modified clutch around, I'm probably going to have a spare Stage 6 Torque Control clutch and bell around now. Since I'm going to change the orange springs back to the purple springs, I am going to do one more thing while I'm at it. I'm going to go ahead and take all the springs out, and then I'm going to take all of the screws on here. There's 3 up front, and then you can see 6 on the back. I'm going to take all those out and apply Loctite. I'm just going to do one at a time, some medium strength thread locker to each one. Don't have experience with this thing. I can't tell you if that is actually necessary, but it seems like it can't be a bad idea. Now if I pull one of these out and it's already got thread locking compound on it from the factory, in that case I won't pull any more out, but otherwise I'm going to go ahead and coat those. Could be one of those small things that saves you a lot of trouble in the near future. I don't see anything on there, no kind of coating, so I'm going to go ahead and put a little bit of medium strength thread locker on, if I can get the cap off. I hope you've been able to see how the Stage 6 clutch works, how you can work with it, and basically what to expect from it. If you've enjoyed this video or found it helpful, please give it a like, share it, and subscribe for more. Thank you for watching.